Okay, so we're looking at Exposure by Wilfred Owen. Before we go into the title, does anybody know, just by reading the poem, what do we think the context of this poem is? When do you think it was written? World War One. Okay, so it's a World War One poem. Do you think that Wilfred Owen is for or against the way World War One goes? He's very much against it. This is an anti-war poem. Wilfred Owen, in fact, wrote many, many poems. He's one of the greatest World War I poets. If you've ever looked at Dulce et Decorum Est or any of his other work, it's fantastic, but it is very, very miserable, and this is a thoroughly negative poem. Now, we looked at the word exposure in our starter activity. There are 3 meanings to exposure. Can anybody give me one of them? Zubin? But what does exposure mean in that? Yeah, what does exposed mean? Somebody going to give me a hand? The first meaning of exposure is when we are put in front of something we don't want to be put in front of. So you're shown something unwanted. How might this link to the content of this poem? So if we know that exposure means that we're shown something unwanted, how might that link? Yep. Yeah, exactly. He's seeing things he doesn't want to see. On top of that, we could take that from an extraneous idea, the idea of outside of the box of the soldier, of the character, and we could say, well, actually, no, this poem is exposing what World War I was like, okay, to the public, to other people. So that's what exposure means when it's done to you. But what about when you are exposed? Remember we had up on there, exposed for fraud. What does that mean? Sorry? A bit louder? No? It means when something is revealed. So again, that links to this whole idea of the fact that the people back home during World War I did not know what was going on. If you know anything about your World War I history, you'll know the amount of letters that had redacted information from them. So you'd send a letter home going, oh my God, it's miserable here, the food's really, really not good at all. And the letter would go home and the word not would be crossed out. So it'd say the food's really good. Okay, people at home had no idea what was going on. So the idea of something being revealed here, we could argue that this is revealing what was going on there. And the third one, she was suffering from exposure. What is exposure? Theo? You're on the right track. It's actually the name of an illness you get when your core temperature drops too low. So make sure you're writing down these notes. Okay, don't forget, guys, when it comes to the exam, obviously you have to memorize things. The title of the poem counts as a quotation. So if you can't remember any quotations at all, as long as you know the name of the poem, you've already got one. So, exposure is an illness you get when you get too cold. Okay, it's when your core body temperature drops so low that you are unable to use your own energy sources to bring it back up again. It's a horrible way to die. Absolutely horrible way to die. Okay? And when we read the rest of the poem, we get the idea of what is going on here. So let's have a look at this first stanza. Actually, no, let's look at the structure first, because that's what we normally move on to. So, would you say that the structure of this poem is regular or irregular? It's very regular. And we'll link that in a minute to things that happen in the poem. What about rhyme? Do we have rhyme? there's a few internal rhymes, but there's no rhyme pattern. So it's that whole idea that the rhyme that's there is a bit incidental. Okay? Do we have any repetition? Yeah. Repetition is the big bit in this. Now that links to that regular structure, doesn't it? Because it's a regular structure, it's repetition, and it's cyclical, isn't it? It keeps on going, keeps on going. What might that suggest about the nature of war? Will, what might it suggest about the nature of war? Yeah, war is continuous. Now, I want you to have a look at the last lines. I'm not actually going to be too bothered about the fact that you can or can't see this, because what do you notice about the last line of each stanza? Yeah, Lucy? Yeah, but not about what it says, but what do you notice about the structure? They are full sentences, but they are, what do we call it when we move a sentence along a little bit along? So what do we call it when we have a little gap at the end here? Yeah, it's called indenting. So last line of each stanza is indented. What does that do to the last line? What does it do to the last line? Does it all look the same? No, it sticks out, doesn't it? It emphasises it. Oh, let's move the camera back. So it emphasises it. So that suggests that that last line, that repeated line, is really important. Okay? So, we've got a regular structure talking about the idea that war is continual. We've got no rhyme pattern to speak of, but we have got some internal rhyme which could actually bring things out. We've got a lot of repetition, and the last lines are indented to emphasise them. So let's go up to the first couple of stanzas. And do them. This poem, actually, we can move stanza by stanza. Because interestingly enough, we don't have any enjambment between one stanza to the next with this poem. It's very specifically stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3. Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. Wearied we keep awake because the night is silent. Low drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. Worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but nothing happens. So, what's actually happening here? What are the soldiers doing? Aaron, what are the soldiers doing? Bit louder, sorry? They're trying not to go to sleep, yeah? But what do you think soldiers in World War I would be doing? What do we expect a poem about World War I soldiers to be doing, Alfie? Yeah, we'd expect them to be fighting or preparing to fight, wouldn't we? What are these doing? Are they fighting? No, they are waiting for something to happen. And is it coming? No. They're just sat there waiting and waiting and waiting. And it's that, it puts you in that mind. I don't know how many of you this has ever happened to, but if you imagine that you know that a teacher is going to phone home and tell your mum about something you've done, or your dad that was about something you've done, that is really, you don't want them to know about it. And you get home and your mum goes, "Hi, how are you?" And you're like, "Oh my God, they haven't phoned yet." And then a half hour later, they haven't phoned yet. And an hour later, they haven't phoned yet. And you're sitting there going, any minute now, that phone's going to ring. Any minute now. And they're going to get the email and they're going to find out, oh God, oh God, oh God. And you know it. And it gets worse and worse and worse because it's building the tension up. okay? And that's what we've got going on here. So they're waiting for battle. And then we have this first line. Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. What does merciless mean? May, what does merciless mean? What does it mean to have mercy, first of all? Yeah, to feel sorry for somebody, to take care of them. So if it's merciless, what does that suggest? Yeah, it doesn't care. Now the question is, can the wind care? So what device are we using? Personification, good. So we have personification here. That knife us. Now, question is, what sort of person is a soldier expecting to knife them? German. Yeah, the Germans, the enemy. So this is the personification of the wind as the enemy. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. Low drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. Do you guys know what the salient is? Those of you who studied World War I, historians? The Ypres salient is where is majority of where World War I's trench warfare was fought. Okay, it's in Belgium. It's just literally the place that they are. There are bits of it that are in France, yes, but the primary front was Ypres, which is in Belgium. Spelt that way. Okay. Now, what are these bits at the end here? These ellipses, the dot, dot, dot. Yeah, completely well done. They're waiting for something. It implies there's something coming. Low drooping flares confuse our memory. Worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but nothing happens. Okay. So they're waiting for this thing, and it's not coming. It's not coming at all. So they are stuck at this point. They can't move further because they have to wait here, but nothing is happening. And we've got a lot of words here, haven't we? Worried, confused, curious, nervous, wearied even. What sort of emotions are these soldiers experiencing? Yeah, it's very negative. And they're having to stay awake as well, aren't they? There's nothing worse than being told you have to stay awake, because the first thing your brain says is, I have to stay awake, that means I must go to sleep. Okay? So they're finding it very, very difficult. Interesting that it's we and not I. Watching, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. Northward, incessantly, the flickering gunnery rumbles, far off like a dull rumour of some other war. What are we doing here? Okay, so the mad gusts tugging on the wire. Can the wind be mad? No, so we've got more personification here. The personification continues. Tugging on the wire. What sort of wire do you think it is? Barbed wire. Good, we need that for the next line. Like twitching agonies of men amongst its brambles. So first of all, what device have we got there? Like twitching agonies of men amongst its brambles. Got the word like, so it must be simile. Fantastic. Okay, so you've got a simile. Now, it's interesting. What are brambles? Sharp. Yeah, they're sharp. They're basically natural barbed wire, aren't they? They are blackberry bushes, etc. So, like twitching agonies of men amongst its brambles. Okay, so it's that whole idea of the fact that the pain that they're going through is almost like the men that have basically been blown up and blown into barbed wire. But it's not barbed wire that he says here, it's brambles. So what does that suggest about nature? Because brambles are natural, aren't they? What does it suggest about nature? What is it doing here? Yeah, it's causing them pain. Nature's causing them pain. Northward, incessantly, the flickering gunnery rumbles far off like a dull rumour of some other war. Do any of you guys know what incessantly means? If I tell you that you're incessantly talking, what do you think it means? Constant, never stopping. Fantastic. So it means never stopping. So although where they are, there's no gunfire, in the distance they can hear it. Far off, like a dull rumour of some other war. So they're far away from it. Why do they call it some other war? Because it's not, as far as because they're all involved in the same war. There's loads of little battles going on. So we've got this idea that they are far removed from it. They feel detached, removed. And then we've got, what are we doing here? What does that suggest about them being there? It's pointless. Thank you, Brandon. You never ask that question unless you already know that the answer is that it's pointless you being there. Now, got a couple of bits here so far that have been talking about the weather, have been talking about how negative the weather is. Can anybody think of a poem that we've looked at so far that we could link this with? Think about another poem that's got to do with the weather. Storm on the Island, fantastic. That would be a great poem to compare this with. Okay? Because it's that whole idea of the weather being against them. So let's look at the third stanza now. The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. Interesting how. What is dawn usually associated with? The rising of the sun, positive or negative? It's normally a positive image. Why is dawn being portrayed as a negative image here, JJ? Lucy?
Because, like, they've been up so long that, like, dawn is now, like,
Yeah, it's another day of misery. So dawn at this point is negative, it's not positive. Dawn is associated with more misery, more pain. I'll try and get this clear. So I'm trying to make this clearer for you guys. There we go. We only know war lasts, rain soaks, and clouds sag stormy. Those three things there. These are the only things that they can rely on. These are the only truths they know. Everything else is subject to change. Dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army. What's being personified here? It's no longer the wind. What's being personified? Dawn, the sun. And again, it's that continuation that dawn is the enemy. Dawn is the miserable army. So more personification. Another day is the enemy. More misery, more suffering. Attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey. But nothing happens. So we've got this idea of the fact that this is never going to change. It's every day. once more, and then but nothing happens again. So that repetition there, still nothing is happening. So they've gone through the night, it's now the beginning of the day, there's still no firing coming, it's still ridiculously silent and weird and creepy, and they're still waiting. So those three stanzas, they're quite calm, aren't they? Nothing's going on. It's really quite calm, quite chill. Although it's negative, it's like calm before the storm, isn't it? And then we get this next stanza. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. What are we getting in that very first sentence there? Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence. Alliteration, it's actually a specific form of alliteration called sibilance, which is the repetition of an S sound. And it makes it stick out, doesn't it? We've gone from this very sort of calm, uneasy, calm sort of thing to sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence. It emphasises the action happening. Less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. What is worse for them? Bullets or where they are?
Where they are.
Yeah. The weather is more deadly than bullets. With sidelong flowing flakes that flock. So we've got more alliteration here. Flowing flakes that flock. It's a kind of a dead sound, isn't it? When you think about when you last year when you were walking through the snow and you could hear that kind of thump as you put your foot down in thick snow. So it's like a deadening sound. Sorry, Subin? Fair point it is. It was last year. This year it didn't snow till January. We watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance. What does nonchalance mean?
Nonsense.
No. It means uncaring again. Doesn't care. So it's a repeated idea. And then that repetition again, but nothing happens. So even though they've been shot at, they're still not going any further. All they've got to do is they've been told to wait there, so they're waiting there. So even though they're being shot at, they can't shoot back because they've been told not to. Okay? They're following orders. They can't fight back. Okay. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare snow-dazed deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse, sun-dozed, littered with blossoms trickling where the blackbird fusses. Is it that we are dying? So we start again with more of that kind of dead sound. Okay, the deadening sound again. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare, snow-dazed, deep into grassier ditches. So what are they dreaming about? What are they thinking about? Grassier ditches, sun-dozed, littered with blossoms, trickling where the blackbird fusses. What are they thinking about? What would you be thinking about if you were freezing cold? Sorry? I can't hear you, Zubin. You're actually on the right track there. You might be thinking of McDonald's, but they're thinking of images of home, comfort, warmth. You're thinking of warmth, food, comfort. It's a similar idea. So they're thinking back and they're dreaming of home. So we drowse, sun-dozed, littered with blossoms. We've got all these beautiful images, grassier ditches, blackbird fusses, forgotten dreams. And then we have this is it that we're dying? Why, after all of those beautiful dreams about home, does he think that that is a sign that they're dying? What does he think is happening? Yeah? Yeah? And their memories are almost like heaven. So we've got memories of home and he's associating that with heaven. Because in reality, they're cringing in holes and staring snow-dazed. So the reality is that they're afraid and they're cold. Slowly our ghosts drag home, glimpsing the sunk fires, glozed with crusted dark red jewels. Crickets jingle there, for hours the innocent mice rejoice. The house is theirs, shutters and doors all closed. On us the doors are closed. We turn back to our dying. Why is he referring to them as ghosts? Why is he referring to them as ghosts? Yeah. And also, they have you ever heard the phrase, we're all just ghosts waiting to happen? Yeah? It's a bit creepy, but it's that whole idea of the fact that just because they're not dead yet, the word is yet. He knows he's eventually going to die. They may as well be dead. And that word, drag home, they're moving like they're dead. With crusted dark red jewels, crickets jingle there. What do we think dark red jewels could be? Blood, yeah. So we've got this idea of blood and pain. For hours the innocent mice rejoice, the house is theirs. Shutters and doors all closed. On us the doors are closed. So they can't go home because they're not really there, so they have to turn back to their dying. They can't stay in their dreams forever. They have to come back. And they're returning to reality, returning to the idea that they are all going to die. It's a lovely, cheerful poem, this one. Okay, we're almost done. Since we believe not otherwise can kind fires burn, now ever sun smiles true on child or field or fruit. For God's invincible spring our love is made afraid. Therefore not loath we lie out here. Therefore we're born. For love of God seems dying. So, kind fires can burn. Sun smiles true on a child, but not them. So we've got this idea here that the sun used to make them happy, but it being the suggestion of a new day, it's now the enemy. So as children, the sun made them happy, but now it's the enemy. For love of God seems dying. What are they losing? Yeah, they're losing their faith in God. And then the last stanza, where it truly gets miserable. Seriously, if you think it was miserable until now, you'd be surprised. Tonight this frost will fasten on this mud and us, shrivelling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party, picks and shovels in shaking grasp, pours over half-known faces, all their eyes ice, but nothing happens. So what's going to happen this evening? They're going to freeze. They know what's going to happen. Why do they know what's going to happen? Think about it. Why do they know that they're all going to freeze tonight? Yeah, and what happened last night? Nothing happens. Continual, all over again. It happened again. It happened last night. Last night they lost some people. They died of exposure. And tonight they're going to lose some more. Nothing is changing. They are still all going to die eventually, whether they get shot or whether they die of exposure. Shrivelling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party picks and shovels in shaking grasp. So they're going to have to bury the dead. And even when they are burying the dead, they're still going to be ill themselves. So they know they're going to have to bury the dead in the morning. Yep.
The paragraphs, like, some of them are, the last one in bold and then the one above it is, that seemed like a thicker text.
Because my word skills are not as good as I thought they were. Didn't notice. The burying party picks and shovels in shaking grasp, pours over half-known faces. So these soldiers have been there so short a time before they died, they don't even know them. Or it could be that the cold has changed them so much they're no longer who they thought they were. All their eyes are ice. Who are they talking about? Which soldiers? The dead ones. They also talk, but it says the burying party there. Could they be talking about the living ones as well? Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're dead or alive. Your eyes are glossed over. Difference between the dead and the living is there's no difference between the dead and the living. The difference between the dead and the living is non-existent. And then the last line, but nothing happens. So even after the fact that they know that people have died of exposure, they're gone, starts again. They just have to keep waiting. Cycle starts again. They go through the day, they get to the night, they know they've got to stay awake, the dawn comes, and they wake up and find out which ones of them have frozen to death. As I said, a lovely poem. What other poems could we compare this to? So we've got Storm on the Island, what else could we compare it to? Sorry? Yes, the misery, the continual misery, the corruption, certainly. Bayonet charge, most definitely. This bayonet charge goes very well with this one because it's that whole idea of World War I, misery, soldiers being sent to their death even though there's people don't really care. Could you compare it to kamikaze, do you think?
No.
What, the inevitability of death? Yeah. Very much compare it to kamikaze. Anything else? Yeah. Any of the war poems. Remains would go well with this as well. That idea of the fact that you can't get away from it. Fantastic, guys. Thank you very much.